It's 3 in the morning, your baby will not stop crying. You are alone, phone in one hand, scrolling through a parenting forum, looking for someone, anyone, awake right now who can tell you this is normal. Nobody answers. The apartment is silent. The whole building is asleep. Somewhere below you, a neighbor's air conditioner hums. That's the only company you've got. For 99% of human history, this exact scene would have been almost impossible to stage. Not because babies cried less, they didn't, but because you would never have been alone with one in the first place. Here's the reframe. The isolation is the strange part of this picture, not the crying. Right now, in 2026, the average new parent handles a newborn largely alone, maybe with one partner, maybe not even that, in a house where everyone else is asleep, or at work, or 3 time zones away on a video call you'll answer tomorrow. Your ancestors never faced this particular problem because they were never given the chance to be alone with a baby to begin with. Anthropologist Melvin Konner spent years in the 1970s living with the Hrdy San people of the Kalahari Desert in what is now Botswana and Namibia. What he documented about their infants looked almost nothing like a quiet nursery down the hall. San babies were held, or in direct skin contact with an adult, for roughly 90% of daylight hours during their first year, not swaddled nearby in a crib, held, constantly. You read that correctly, 90%. And it wasn't only the mother doing the holding. Here's where it gets interesting. Anthropologist Sarah Hrdy spent decades researching something she named cooperative-breeding. Her argument, built across work through the 1990s and 2000s, is that humans are the only great ape species where infants are routinely cared for by adults who are not the mother. Chimpanzee mothers do not casually hand a baby to an aunt. Gorilla mothers do not pass an infant to a grandmother while they forage nearby. Human mothers do this constantly, and, as far as the evidence shows, always have. Grandmothers held babies, older siblings held babies, fathers held babies, even unrelated adults in the group held babies. Hrdy calls these people alloparents, and her research suggests human infants only survived at the rate they did because of this shared network, not in spite of it. Let that sit for a second. The village raising the child isn't a folksy saying stitched onto a throw pillow. It's closer to an accurate description of how your species stayed alive at all. So what did this actually look like, hour to hour? Picture a sand camp at midday. A baby moves from an aunt's hip to a 10-year-old cousin's lap, to a grandmother stirring something over a low fire, all within 20 minutes, and nobody treats the handoff as remarkable. Nobody asks permission first. The baby barely registers the change of arms, because physical contact never really stops. When it's hungry, it nurses. Konner's data suggests San infants nursed on demand roughly every 13 minutes throughout the day. Not every 3 hours. Not on a schedule taped to a refrigerator. Every 13 minutes, whenever the baby wanted it, for as long as it wanted. There was no formula, no bottle warmer, no app quietly logging feeding times on someone's phone. There was a body, almost always within reach, belonging to someone who loved that baby. And at night, that closeness didn't switch off either. Sleep researcher James McKenna at the University of Notre Dame has spent decades studying what happens when infants sleep close to a caregiver rather than alone in a separate room. His lab work through the 1990s and 2000s found that nighttime proximity was linked to more stable infant breathing patterns, and in his study populations, a reduced risk of sudden infant death. The physical closeness wasn't just sentimental. It may have been doing something biological the whole time, regulating an infant's breathing and body temperature the way no crib on the other side of a wall ever could. Think about what that actually implies. A separate nursery, quiet monitors humming, a video camera streaming the crib to your phone so you can check on a baby without getting up, is a whole industry built to substitute for something that used to be automatic. Proximity used to be the monitor. Here's the part nobody tells you at the hospital. A crying baby alone in a dark room down the hall is a genuinely modern invention. For most of human history, the baby was never in its own room because rooms with doors that closed barely existed for most people, and because someone capable of picking it up was always within arm's reach anyway. So why did all of this fall apart? Why are you, tonight, doing this so much more alone than your ancestors ever did? Somewhere between hunting and gathering and modern city living, the extended group that shared the work quietly dissolved. Grandmothers moved cities away, sometimes continents away, siblings scattered for jobs and rent, neighbors became strangers behind separate front doors with separate locks. The nuclear family, one or two adults handling an infant with essentially no backup, is a strange, historically recent arrangement. It is not the tested, proven default it gets marketed as. Your instinct to want more hands isn't weakness, it's your biology correctly noticing that something structural is missing. But it gets stranger still. The thing modern parents are now told to strive for, endless skin contact, feeding on demand, co-sleeping, wearing the baby in a wrap all day, gets marketed as a bold new parenting philosophy, with a name, a hashtag, and a subscription newsletter. It isn't new. It's roughly what a San grandmother would have called an ordinary Tuesday. And here's the twist that reframes the whole video. Modern parents didn't invent better parenting. They forgot the original version, piece by piece, then had to rediscover fragments of it and give each fragment a brand name. Fathers weren't left out of this system either, which is worth saying plainly, because the stereotype of the absent ancient dad doesn't hold up well against the evidence. Hrdy's cooperative breeding research treats fathers as one thread among several, not the only thread, but a real one. A father who held a baby while the mother foraged nearby wasn't doing something exceptional or praiseworthy. He was doing his ordinary share of an arrangement everyone in camp depended on. There was no concept of babysitting, because there was no concept of being the only person on duty in the first place. Grandmothers deserve their own mention here too. Some researchers studying unusually long human lifespans have pointed to grandmothers specifically as one reason humans, unlike most mammals, live decades past their own fertile years. A body that can no longer have children of its own can still keep someone else's child alive, fed and held, and in a system this dependent on extra hands, that extra pair mattered enormously. Somewhere in that gap, something else quietly disappeared too, and it's worth sitting with honestly rather than glossing over. In a system built on shared care, no single adult carried the entire weight alone, and no single adult was expected to. A tired mother 100,000 years ago could hand her baby to someone else and walk off for an hour, to rest, to eat something warm, to simply not be needed for 60 straight minutes. A tired parent tonight, phone light glowing against a dark ceiling, very often cannot. Same instinct to protect a child, same exhaustion, radically different amount of backup standing behind it. Almost nothing about the actual experience of raising an infant has changed across 100,000 years, except that one gap, quietly widening with every generation that moved further from the fire. The honest answer is, nobody can reconstruct San family life from 100,000 years back with total certainty. Konner and Hrdy studied living hunter-gatherer groups as a working model for the deep past, not a video recording pulled straight from it, and every group across that stretch of time undoubtedly differed from the next. But the pattern, shared infant care, near constant contact, nursing on demand, sleeping close through the night, shows up again and again across cultures with no contact with one another, separated by oceans and thousands of years. That kind of independent repetition is exactly the sort of pattern anthropologists take seriously. So the next time you're up at 3 in the morning, alone with a crying baby, know this. Your baby's crying isn't a malfunction, and it never was. It's ancient, expected, completely ordinary. The part that would have genuinely shocked a San grandmother isn't the noise coming from the crib. It's the silence coming from everywhere else in the house. It's 3 in the morning again. The baby is still crying. But maybe now you're listening for something different underneath that silence. Not proof that something is wrong with you, but a very old, very human signal that you were never actually supposed to be doing this entirely alone. Tell me, if you had a full village around you tonight, who's the first person you'd hand the baby to? That's it for this one. If this stretched what you thought you knew about how ancient humans actually raise their children, you know what to do.